Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Mythology Monday. With me, I'm your host, Alice Hanov, and today we're wrapping up our conversation about Greek mythology, specifically detailing the monsters. Now, I'm not going to delve too much into the history or specifics of the monsters individually themselves. We're going to do a basic rundown of them and that, mainly because the monsters that have influenced stories and parts of my world of Torian are actually an entire segment to themselves, and is going to be the one that we'll be starting after we finish going through the specific mythologies and urban legends and that have become part of my series. So how the monsters influenced me was in university. I took two back-to-back courses on Greek mythology. One was the heroes and one was the gods. And you can't learn about the heroes of Greek mythology without learning about the monsters, because without the monsters, the heroes would have had nothing to do. So I learned a lot about the different monsters, and actually what stuck with me, more so than the battles and the victories of the heroes in that, was how unfortunate and misunderstood a lot of the lives of these monsters were. For just as some examples, we have the Minotaur, who is trapped in the labyrinth in Crete. He did not ask to be created as a half bull, half human, and yet he exists. The same for Cerberus, the three-headed dog who guards the underworld. You have the Harpies, who are upper half body of a woman, bottom half is a bird. You have mermaids, who are half fish, half human. You have satyrs and centaurs. So a satyr is a half goat, half guy, with like horns on their heads usually, and a centaur is a half man, half horse. And then there's the monsters that are entirely monsters, such as like the Hydra and the Sphinx and griffins and this sort of thing. And so a lot of times the stories tell about the monsters are causing problems and they're killing people, they're kidnapping maidens, whatever. And then the heroes are sent to slay the monster and save the girl and move on, which is a very typical story that you often read about in literature. But I would read it and feel bad for the monster. And the reason being is that none of them asked to be monsters, the same way that Frankenstein's monster didn't ask to be created, didn't ask to be a monster in that regard. And so a lot of my sympathy went to the monsters themselves, which is one of the reasons they have influenced my writing as much, and why the theme of is a monster really a monster sneaks into my book with some of the less redeeming characters, and even in some of the animals that are going to be showing up later in the series. They don't come into play in books 1 and 2, but in book 3, the Heir rises, we are going to meet a lot more sorcerers in that book, and then we're going to be exposed to significantly more monsters and creatures in the sorcerer world, or sorcerer part of the world of Torium. And so I always found the monsters fascinating. And I mentioned before when I was talking about the different sorcerer lines, and the monsters of Greek mythology have also a historical context in my world, because they are the founders of the line of the Tyr. And I really liked having that component in the world, because the Tyr sorcerers are so involved in animals, and they're so kind and helpful as a sorcerer. Like, they're one of the nicest of the sorcerer lines in the entire Forbidden Lands, and yet they come from monsters, essentially. And so if you missed that video, go back and watch it. But the gist of it is that the monsters that were half human, half monster, or half god, they bred with humans, and then some of those children ended up looking entirely human, but got the magical powers that the monsters would have had. And so they became the Tyr sorcerers, where they had magical gifts, but they were born from monsters, and so these gifts were animal related. And so I liked being able to put a positive spin on the creation of the monsters from Greek mythology. I've always said that Greek mythology is the biggest influence in my book itself, mainly because I find it so much fun, and then I've added bits and pieces of other stories, legends, mythologies, etc. into particular aspects of the world, or in some cases, like the Arthurian legends, they've been woven into more of the human storyline aspect of things. But I've loved Greek mythology so much, and this is one of the reasons that the monsters are playing a side role as well as a more main role. I mean, there are going to be some of the monsters of Greek mythology showing up in the story itself, but the lineage of the monsters and giving them a positive spin is the reason that the monsters are so big in the world itself. And I really liked being able to take something that everybody is afraid of and everyone thinks is horrible and just like gross and evil, and flip it on its head and make the Tyr sorcerers one of the best sorcerers. They communicate with animals, they're really value their family. They're one of the few lines that have more than one child because family is important to them, whereas sorcerers like Ares and Salem are just violent, sadistic monsters. So the fact that the Tiras have become gentle and kind and are best friends with the Celtics, who are known for peace and harmony, was just a delightful little switcheroo that I decided to do there. So if you haven't done any studies or read about any Greek mythology monsters, I highly recommend reading some of the stories. They are very entertaining. My favorite is Theseus and defeating the Minotaur because it has a labyrinth, and I really enjoy that. But yeah, so if you have any questions about the different mythology monsters, drop them in the comments. I will do my best to answer them. And thanks for stopping by, and I hope you guys have a great Monday. Happy reading!